We're going to talk about how to find the addresses. And I think this is the video that's due this week on Friday. We're going to go over it now a little, like just get you introduced to it. We've been talking about LANs and WANs. And if you've noticed the pictures that I showed today, most of them, we had like the default gateway. We had the router with the interface that faced the LAN. And in the pictures that we saw, most of them had more than one device, right? They'd have 3 or 4. In labs, we almost only ever just set up one device from a space perspective, right? I can't have you setting up 4 PCs a piece. But in reality, again, if you think about your home network, chances are you have more than one device on your home network. You might have a couple, okay? And as network administrators, you will need to determine those addresses. And in order to know what addresses are available, we have to figure out which addresses are available. Even if you set up DHCP. So what is DHCP? Dynamic host configuration, okay? So dynamic, we statically assign IP addresses in here to make it easy. But if you're working on a larger network, you'll probably want to use DHCP because it makes it easier. Even if you're using DHCP, you have to know what addresses are available so you can tell DHCP, hey, go ahead and randomly, dynamically assign addresses from this range of addresses. Well, you, as the network administrator, are the ones who determine that. Additionally, from a security perspective, right, if you're thinking about security, there's a lot of vulnerabilities at IP. There's vulnerabilities at DHCP. DHCP distributes IP addresses, so we know there's vulnerabilities with IP. DHCP functions at the application layer. We know that there's vulnerabilities at the application layer. So again, for those of you that are moving into network security, cybersecurity, it's important that you link back, like what that is securing the network or setting up a secure network, okay? You can't have cybersecurity without knowing what a network is, how the network works, how packets move, how data moves, where your vulnerabilities are, okay? What we're going to be doing is we're going to take what we've learned about IP addressing and network addressing, and we're going to keep moving on this so that we can figure out what the network address is, okay? So we're going to walk through some examples. And we started talking about this earlier. The first thing to know is like the network address, that's when all the host bits are turned off, right? All of the host bits are turned off. And in here, do we all have the same network? We do, but our host bits are different. That's why we each have a unique IP address, because we can manipulate the host bits. Once you belong to a network, that's it. You belong to that network, okay? So a network address is when all the host bits are turned off. A first usable address, because remember, we have 2 addresses that aren't usable. The network address, and what's the other one? The broadcast. But we need to know what addresses I can use. What addresses can I assign to this computer and that projector and that computer? What can I use? What we're going to do is we'll figure out what the first usable address is and the last usable, and everything in between. Are those usable? Yeah, they're usable, okay? The definition of the first usable address is when all the host bits are off except the last one. All the host bits are off except the last one. Now, I believe this paper that we've given you, I think it says, let's see, network address, all host bits are off. First usable address, flip only the last bit on. So this gives you a little bit of what you're going to need to know when we work through this, okay? So the last usable is when all the host bits are on except the last one. And then if the broadcast address, what do you think the broadcast is? What would the broadcast be? Hold on. All the host bits are on. And can I use that address to assign to a PC? No. Because we reserve that address in order to send out broadcast messages. Does everybody understand that? Like, it's used to broadcast, okay? It's used to broadcast. Okay, I want you to go ahead. We're going to use this one as an example, okay? So what you're going to do on your sheet is you're going to put the IP address right here. Put the IP address right there. So I'm actually going to kind of fill it out as we go. So what was it? 192.168. Let me look at it again. 1.25/24. Okay. Now, I understand that some of you are already pretty good with binary and finding the network address. Just humor me, and I'm going to have you fill out all the bits, okay? But in future ones, you won't have to. So I just want to make sure that everyone gets a nice working example by doing the bits. So on this sheet, we're just filling out the address that we're going to do together. And this just breaks everything down. So if you need it as an example going forward, you've got it as an example going forward, okay? We're going to just go ahead and break down this address into these octets. So what's the first octet for that IP address? 192. And the next one. And the next one. And the next one. 25. Let's go ahead and do the subnet mask as well. So if I've got a /24, what have I got? 255, 255, 255, 0. Thank you. Okay, so now let's go ahead and I want you to bit it out. Okay, so we're going to bit out our address. 192. So at this point, you should already be able to bit these out. So if I have a /24, how many ones are turned on? 24. It's not a trick question. But I do have bad typing skills. Okay, so let's just get to this point and stop, okay? So just let's get to this point and stop. Okay, we're just going to get to this point and stop. So we're here. We're going to pick up from here. We should all have something that looks like this. The 192.168.1.25. This is an IP address. So if we can imagine that we've got our network. Maybe we've got a couple computers. Okay. And then maybe I've got another network. So we're going to fill all this in, okay? And maybe I have another network. Okay. Now, I can do Boolean, right? If we do Boolean, we've got a 1 and a 1, 1 and a 1, 0 and a 1, 0. We could do Boolean, or we could just mask, right? So if I look at this octet, is this part of my network? I know that because the ones are all on in my subnet mask, so it tells me this is part of my network. Do we agree? Okay, what about octet number 2? Is it part of my network? Okay, what about octet number 3? Is it part of my network? Yes. Now, all of these bits are off. So what do we know about these bits? They're off because they're what kind of bits? They're host bits, okay? Again, this is stuff that we've kind of been practicing through the weeks, okay? I know that I've got 192.168.1.0. Now, what do you notice about the host bits? They're all off, and that was the definition of the network, when all the host bits are off, right? So here's our network bits. Here's our host bits. We got that? We're good with that? Okay, so go ahead, and you're going to fill in the network part. Yeah, so, because now we've got it, we've done this part, right? So we saw what this is. We can see that this is the network part. So we're literally just giving ourselves a guide So if you have questions in the future, you've got it worked out. Okay, so now we know that this is 192.168.1.0. So we've got that part figured out. So we know the network address. Okay, so I'm going to call this right here. This is my default gateway. So here is the network. So the network is 192.168.1.0/24. We got that? And we'll call this again, we'll call this our pet company, Petopia. And I'm going to call this the storefront. Okay. Now let's look at the next part, the next piece of this, okay? The next piece of this is we need to find the first usable address, because we need to know what addresses can I assign to my default gateway and to my computers. And maybe I have a printer, and maybe I have a server. I might have a cash register, right? I have these different things. So we need to know what the range is. All right, we need to know what the range is. So we're going to take the network address, right? Here's our network address. And what was the definition of the first usable address with the host bit? Right, all the host bits are off except the last one. So that's what we're going to do with this next piece. The network bits stay the same, okay? But the host bits, we leave them all off except the last one. Okay, we leave them all off except the last one. If we take it over here to our worksheet, does the first octet stay the same? It does, right? It stays the same. Now, what about the second octet? Does it stay the same? It stays the same. What about the third octet? It stays the same. Okay, but what about the fourth octet? What do I need to do? I'm going to change the last bit. I'm going to turn it on. If it was off, I'm going to turn it on. And this will tell you, turn the very last host bit in the network address on. Flip only the last bit. Now I've got it bit out. I can tell what the first usable address would be. So we can fill out this part over here. 192.168.1.1. Everybody got that part? You guys are handwriting, so tell me when it's okay to move ahead. I don't want to move faster than you're moving. You good? Okay. Now we're going to do the last usable address, right? So this was our first usable. Now what was the definition of the last usable? All host bits on except the last one, okay? So we're going to come back here. We're going to start with our network address. Here's our network. Here's our hosts. We're going to flip these all on except the last one. Now we know 192.168.1. This one you got to add up. 128 plus 64 plus 32, blah, 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 blah. Or if you have them all turned on, that's 255 minus 1 is 254. So whichever works. So I want you to fill out your worksheet. All of these are the same, right? For my last usable. Now, can I use my last usable? Yeah, I can use it, right? Now I know what my last usable address is. 192.168.1 dot what? 254. Okay. So in other words, everything between the number 1 and the number 254 are usable addresses. Now, under normal rule of thumb, what would I use this 1.1 address for? Austin? Exactly right. So I'm going to come over here to my topology, and I'm going to assign this the 192.168.1.1/24. Okay? Now, what about 192.168.1.3? Is that usable? Okay, so I could assign that to my server. What about 1.27? right? I could assign that to my printer. What about 1.5? 1.5, right? Everything between 1 and 254 is usable. And how do I arrive at that? I would just flip these bits. Like if I did this, let's make it an easy, that is an easy one. Okay, what would that address be? 88. So we can just flip these to be whatever we want them to be. 192.168, 1.224, 1100001, 1.225. So it's every combination of ones and zeros. Those are usable addresses. That's why we're all on the same network, but you have a unique address, you have a unique address, because the ones and zeros are being flipped. Okay, did we get that? Everybody? Okay, those are usable. Now, what if I had like a /28? Do I have more usable addresses or less usable addresses? Less. Remember, the bigger the subnet mask, the smaller the number of hosts you have. The smaller the subnet mask, like if I had a /16, I've got a gazillion addresses, a lot more, right? But the process of flipping the bits is exactly the same. It's exactly the same, okay? So let's go back. Now what do we have to figure out? The broadcast. Now we're going to do the broadcast. Okay, so here's this. We've got our last usable. We start with our network address. What do I do with the host bits to find the broadcast? I turn them all on. I still have network, right? Now I'm going to turn these all on, and I've got my broadcast. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to fill out my form. What do we know? We know this part all stays the same, because I'm turning on all of the host bits. Okay. Now I've got 192.168.1.255. Okay. So I have a broadcast address, right? That if everybody needed to get a message, they would get a broadcast, and the broadcast would be it would use 1.255 for the broadcast. Okay. This would, let me give this .45, .32, .40, .20. I've got this part, I've got the storefront done, but over here, remember we said we had some vets? We had a vet's office, and we had some groomers. Well, they're on separate networks. The next thing I need to do is I need to figure out, how do I give those their own network address, right? They need a network address. They need a network address. That's what we're going to do next, okay? That's what we're going to do next. We're going to answer these questions. How many host bits do we have if we have a /24? I have 8 host bits. So remember, I had a /24, right? So I've got 8 host bits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 host bits. That's not new. We've done that before. Now, if I have a /24, how many total addresses can I have? 256 total. So that includes my network, my broadcast, and everything in between. How many usable hosts? 254. I subtract 1 for the network, 1 for the broadcast. Now we want to figure out the next 2 networks, okay? This is where we need to know what the positional value is. And remember, that was the magic number. If I have a /24, then I know that my last network bit is right here, right? So I'm just going to highlight this. I know that's my last network bit. Now, what is the positional value of that network bit? 1. So my magic number, or my increment, is 1. And what octet is that 1 in? It's in the 3rd, right? It's in the 3, the 3rd octet. Now, let me go back over here. Okay, so we've gathered the information that we need. So then let's come back here. I've got my network, my first, my last, and my broadcast, right? We're all good on that. We've gathered some information that we're going to need. We know what the available addresses are. I can assign them all of these available addresses that we've talked about. Now what we need to do is find the next networks, and we're going to use the magic number to do that. And this is how we do it. We know what the network address is that we started with. So we're going to take the network address that we started with. We're going to add the magic number to it in the third octet, because we know that we're working in the third octet. So basically, do I need to add anything to the first octet if my third octet is where I'm doing things? Do I need to add anything to the second octet? No. But my magic number was 1, so I'm going to add 1 to the third octet. Was there anything in the fourth octet? No. So the next network is going to be what? 192.168.2. So there is my next network. The vets, they can get 192.168.2.0/24. Now I can go through the same process to find the available addresses. Okay, now I happen to know 192.168.2.1/24. That's my default gateway. Could I give this a .22? 2.22? 2.11? 2.10? Okay. So the same thing, I know the network, now I can find the range. Now I need another one. I need the groomers. Okay, what's the magic number? What octet am I in? 3. So do I add anything to 192? Do I add anything to 168? What do I add to the third octet? I add 1 to the third octet. What is my next network address? Exactly. The groomers, their network is 192.168.3.0/24. What address do I give to the default gateway? 3.1/24. And I can assign this one the .2, and this one the .3, and this one the .4. Could I keep going? Yes, I could keep going. I could keep going. Now, I want you to think back. Last week, we talked about how to figure out the total number of networks. Do you remember how we did that? So we know how to find the number of addresses. If I have a /24, how many networks could I have? How do I do the math? How many network bits are in the last octet, right? Okay, so if I go back here, and I look at this, okay, so this is my last octet with network bits, right? And are these all network bits? Okay, so what do? 2 to the power of 8, which equals 256. So if you come back here, imagine, right, when we're doing the networks, so I've got the .3. Could I add 001 to get a .4? And then 001 to get a .5, .6, .7, .8, .9, .128, .129, .130, .254. I can get 256 networks with a /24. No, the 0. So we started with 1, but I could get 192.168.0.0. Yeah, we just started with the 1. That's how we get different networks. Okay, that's how we get different networks. Now, this is called equal subnetting. This is called equal subnetting because all of the subnetworks, this is a subnetwork, a subnetwork, a subnetwork, they're all exactly the same size. That's called equal subnetting, equal subnetworks. Now we're going to learn how to do variable length subnetting. Because what if I only have 3 groomers, I've got 1 vet, and I've got the store? I'd kind of be wasting a bunch of addresses, okay? I'd be wasting a bunch of addresses. This is called equal subnetting. I'm going to give you an address, and you're going to add this address to another blank. Do you have a blank on the back? Okay. You don't have a blank on the back? Okay. Do we have? Here, you can have this one. A blank one. So let's do this one. Let's see. Let's do 160.160.245/28. So write that down. That's the one you're going to take and you're going to do as homework.